Hello there and welcome to another edition of Ask David. Plenty of summer sunshine, plenty of watering to be getting on with and plenty of weeds to tackle. But what are some of your problems? So first, Anna's got in touch about some fairy rings that have grown up in her lawn. She says that she's got two patches and they're reasonably new and they're starting to get wider. Now, fairy rings are fungus and the fungus is actually decomposing dead organic matter that's in the ground. So it's not harmful to living plants. But what it does do is it uses the energy from that dead material and it sends out lots of what are really like waterproof threads through the soil that stop water soaking in and means that the grass in that particular area probably dies because it hasn't got enough moisture at the roots. So the thing to do is to spike the ground where the fairy rings are so that the water can get into the ground and feed the grass roots to keep the grass in good condition. I would knock the fairy ring fungus, the little tiny toadstools that pop up, I would knock those off and collect them in a gloved hand, collect them and dispose of them. Not necessarily on the compost heap, but probably in the waste bin. And really, other than that, there's not a great deal that you can do because there are no fungicides or anything that you can treat the fairy ring fungus with. So the key thing to get rid of those circular patches in the lawn is to spike it, to let the water in so that the grass can carry on growing. Now, Patsy's question is about her climbing hydrangea. She says it's growing really well, it's established well, she gets good flowers, but of course it carries on growing each year, and as it grows, the growth starts to get away from the wall, and she wants to know how she can prune it to keep it in check without destroying any potential flowers for next year. Well, Patsy, the key thing here is that as soon as it's made its extension growth in the spring, so that's around now, as soon as that growth has finished being made and starts to ripen and toughen up, you can prune that extension growth back to just beyond where it started growing. So come back on that extension growth to around 2 to 3 buds above where it started growing and prune off that what was originally soft growth that has started to firm up. Now, this is typical summer pruning time at this time of year, and you can do that same pruning back the spring growth. You can do that on your fruit bushes and you can also do it on your fruit trees. But Patsy, that's the way to keep your climbing hydrangea in its place. Now, Jenny's concerned about her conifer. She says it's about 8 inches tall, which is about 20 centimetres, and she says she's planted it out from a pot into a raised bed and it looked okay, but now the outside of it is starting to go brown. I think here, Jenny, it's a case of watering. As soon as you've planted that conifer out, it would need plenty of water to help get its roots established into the soil of the raised bed and get firmly established before you can forget about it and leave it to its own devices. So I think with the dry weather that we had earlier on in the season, just as lockdown started, and with more continuing dry weather now, I think you need to keep that conifer watered well and truly, probably 3 times a week, just to keep that water at the roots so it has a chance to establish. Now, Marian wants to know about how to control blanketweed. She says she's got a thriving colony of newts and she wants to be able to control the blanketweed without hurting the population of newts. So the way I control my blanketweed is to get a long garden cane and to gently curl the blanketweed onto the cane by twizzling the stick around in the blanketweed. Just check as you're doing it, don't do it too drastically and quickly. Do it nice and steadily so that you can be sure that you're not catching any newts or other pond life in that tangling blanketweed. Twizzle it round and then take that blanketweed out, strip it from the cane and start again with the next batch. And lastly this week, Sue's got in touch about her rose. She says she wants to know how much to prune back her rose King's Ransom. Now, King's Ransom, Sue, is what's called a hybrid tea bush rose. So this is pretty much the same sort of advice that I would give for any bush rose. So that might be a hybrid tea or a floribunda, a multiflora rose. So the key thing now is that as the flowers start to fade, you can deadhead the individual blooms, and once those blooms have been deadheaded, each individual bloom has been picked off. When the whole flower stem fades and dies, then I would prune that main stem that's been made this year. I would prune it back by around half, just to above a leaf bud, and you'll find that you'll get regrowth from the buds where you've pruned back to, and that should produce a second flush of blooms a bit later on in the season. Now in the autumn or in the spring, you can then cut all your bush roses back down hard, back close to the ground as you can get, cutting each of the main stems down to 2 or 3 buds from the base in the case of a hybrid tea or a single flowered rose, bush rose, and with the multifloras or the floribundas, I would prune back to around 4 or 5 buds from the base. So 2 or 3 buds on the single or hybrid tea forms, and 4 to 5 buds on the multiflora or floribunda roses. And that way you're keeping the bushes nice and compact. All that vigorous growth that they'll then make next spring will carry blooms, and then don't forget next summer you'll need to deadhead and cut those stems back to get that second flush of blooms again now. So at the moment, no hard pruning, just deadheading and then cutting back those vigorous strong stems that have borne the flowers so far, cutting those back by about half so you get regrowth to get a second flush of flowers. So there you go, another batch of questions answered. I'm going to go and deadhead my own roses now, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another edition of Ask David.